$200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES. Only on Super NES. You're listening to the SNES Podcast with your host, Soul Blazer.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Super NES Podcast. This is episode number 182, and this is a very special episode of everybody who's listening to us, because we are to be honored to finally have finally be doing something that Joe and I have been wanting to do for a while now. We are revisiting the Star Wars games on the Super NES, which in the same vein as how we did the Chrono Trigger revisit recently, we're gonna be revisiting these games as well too, because it's been a long time like to cover the games on the podcast. We have different hosts on the podcast this time around to talk about the games. So I wanted to go back and revisit these games, to give them another updated treatment. So besides my regular co-host Joe.
Hello.
We're also very glad to have three guest hosts with us at this episode to talk about the games. They're all people who've been on the podcast before in the past, but since some of you may be new, and since some of you may be not familiar with them, and I'm hoping because of what this episode is, it will bring in a bunch of first-time listeners because it is Star Wars. So if you're first time listening, hello, glad to have you here. But anyway, so I'm gonna Okay, so I'm going to ask each of our guest hosts on turn. When I introduce you, just talk about yourself a little bit, any podcasts, groups, whatever that you actually take part in, and your experience with Super Star Wars games. How much experience do you have playing the games? Sort of versions of the games they play, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, before we get into the bread and butter of the episode. So, and then after. After that point, we're going to be doing topics like games talk about. With each of us taking a turn talk about the stuff in general, because there's five of us. If we didn't do it in a more organized fashion, it would be absolute chaos on here. So, but anyway, so let's start off first with Willie. Just remind folks who you are, Willie, to plug anything you want to plug and talk about your history of Star Wars Super Star Wars games, please.
Alright, so I guess I start out. Hey, it's Will. So former member of the SNES Podcast.
Sorry, Will, yeah. My bad.
Oh, yeah, it's no problem. Well, you also have Willie on here, too, sometimes.
Yes.
We both go by William, too. Did you want to start for the top again, or...?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, whatever you want to do, that's fine. Just go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So, hi, this is William. I was the former co-host of the SNES Podcast, and I was also a member of the Move Over Kids podcast. Pretty big Star Wars fan since, started watching in the 80s, and then it completely went over my head what it was I was watching, how big of a phenomenon the movies were, and then got really into it into the 90s, into the 2000s. More stuff came out. Ended up meeting my wife, who was also a big Star Wars fan, and we've been going to the conventions and stuff. You should see the apartment. There's a lot of Star Wars stuff. Right over to my right, I've actually got some of the Legos for Star Wars, some of the helmets they've done. So yeah, I'm pretty deep in the lore of the movies and some of the background stuff for them as well. The games, I played the games years ago and didn't really pick them up after that because I didn't have a Super Nintendo at the time. But I've been trying to get some copies eventually. It's just a matter of if I can find them in the stores or not. I just don't want to do eBay for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. But okay, awesome. Well, glad to have you again here, Will. Liam, why don't you go next?
Hi folks, it's Liam here. I was on the show a few months ago for the Poppin' Twinbee episode. I am a writer at liampiperblog.wordpress.com. I write video game reviews, write about my life. Got a new thing launching in the coming months where I actually talk about video game music. My history with Star Wars is extremely thin, admittedly. I have not actually watched any of the movies. My brother is a bit of a fanatic about Star Wars. In terms of these games as well, I went into these completely blind. I didn't play these growing up because I was born in the early 90s, and by the time I was at an age that I felt maybe I could play them, I was a little, like, the SNES had kind of moved on. I'd moved on to like PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2, so very much going into this from the more neutral perspective.
Okay, awesome. So like, it'll be great to have somebody here in the podcast who's not played these games before in the past. So we have like a fresh perspective I can bring into it, like, for sure, because the rest of us all have history with the games. So, and then finally, last but not least, Arron.
Hey there. Well, I'm glad my internet decided to cooperate. It dropped out for a second, so I missed what Liam said. But I know, talking offline, the basic gist. So I will give my brief background. I've been podcasting for about 10 years. Started out on, I think, Stalking the Retro, moved on to Retro Obscura, and finally Genesis Gems, which I've been doing for God knows how long now. So I've definitely been in the retro gaming podcast seed for quite a while. I am also a chiptune and video game composer, and have done music for all sorts of old video game systems. And as far as my history with Star Wars and these games in general, like many of you, I was introduced to Star Wars at a very young age. I think I was 3 or 4 when I first saw the Star Wars trilogy. I think we had them on VHS. And for you younger listeners, VHS was the medium by which we had things on a tape, and you put them in a VCR, and that's how you watched it. Kind of grainy, but that was how I experienced the Star Wars films. I didn't get to see them in theaters until the special editions came out later in the 90s, like the late 90s. But yeah, I was as enthralled and just loved the series from day one. Enjoyed the movies. I'm not as much of a in-depth nerd with Star Wars as I am in other things, like video games in general, I guess. But I have a huge appreciation of the series, and have watched almost every one of the movies that has come out. As far as the games, so I'm like the youngest of 5 kids, and I remember growing up, we had an NES, Sega Genesis, and a Super Nintendo. We were the rare family that had all 3. And yeah, I want to say I played Star Wars on NES and Empire, but then playing the Super Nintendo games, it was just kind of it was crazy. It was just a leap forward quality wise and presentation wise, that just kind of blew my mind when I played them. But even when I was a kid, and I must have been about 7 or 8 when the first one dropped, but I still remember playing it, and what I remember is how hard it was. And I was already playing a ton of video games by that point, but I just remember being overwhelmed by the presentation and actually getting to be Luke, and just the music's blaring and everything. But I used a lot of level skip and a lot of cheats even when I was a kid. So anyone who feels like, oh, I can't believe I'm not going through this game, the right way. I don't know that there's a right way to get through these games. So there you go.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Joe, I'm going to ask you the same question. You obviously don't need to introduce yourself, of course, but but if you want to elaborate upon your Star Wars history and your experience like these games.
Sure. Hi, I'm Joe. I'm the co-host here. Sure you know me. Anyways, yeah, so my history with these games is actually pretty sparse, but I had Super Return of the Jedi for the Game Boy. That was my home experience for quite a while. A friend of mine actually had Super Empire Strikes Back and Super Star Wars, so I got to dabble in those when I would go to his house. Remember, I'm a Genesis kid, so I was denied a lot of really cool things that we talk about on the show. I did not officially play these games until I was well into my 20s, and emulation was very prevalent. I probably could have played them, earlier, in high school when I was, running things off of, SNES X9 and whatnot, but, right. It was primitive back then. It was slow, it was choppy, and you just wouldn't want to play, especially these type of games, on an emulator running at that speed. So, yeah, most of my experience has been with the Game Boy port, if you want to call it that. They really tried to cram it onto that little cart and onto that little screen and make it look just as nice as it did on the SNES.
They really tried.
Yeah, they did. There's a lot of slowdown. The graphics look kind of muddy. It's not a great experience. So, it is what it is. But that's the joy of this podcast. I get to go back and play these games proper and actually have a fresh opinion.
And can we just mention, because you'd said that you were a Sega kid, and I would say I definitely was, and then became an SNES kid also a little later. But I remember thinking, oh man, this would be really cool on the Sega Genesis with less slowdown.
Right.
I'll be honest, there are some slowdown bits in these games. But yeah, recently, I think as recent as 2020, there was a prototype discovered where I think Sega Institute was working on a port of Super Star Wars, New Hope, the first one, yes. And you can actually go check that out if you can find the ROM. And there's not much done, but it's interesting to know that in an alternate history, there could have been a Sega Genesis version. I think there was also a planned PC version also that never made it.
Yeah, the PC version actually got almost finished before it was canceled. So that one's also available to play. It's like to play online if you want to play it.
I did play the prototype for the Genesis, and
not much.
I mean, there's not much that you can do there, but what is there, it shows the promise of what I could have possibly enjoyed as a child.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes me sad that, I could have had that and it just didn't materialize. But at the same time, it got me to go over to my friend's house and spend time with him because he had a Super Nintendo. So
that's fair. And then also, we did get the, on the Sega side, what ended up happening is, if you were like me, you got a Sega CD, and then that's how you got your Star Wars fill that way, because there was Star Wars Chess, and then there was Star Wars Rebel Assault, which would use repurposed footage and some new CG from the films, and then put you in like a gallery shooter game.
And also, I don't think all three were released, but I know at least Super Return of the Jedi was released for the Game Gear as well.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
I mean, not that it's fantastic, but it's a step above the Game Boy port, and that's something to say, so.
Wasn't the Star Wars arcade game, wasn't that ported to a few, wasn't it the Sega CD that it was ported to?
Star Wars arcade game was 32X, and it was actually based off the
32X.
really rare arcade game from the early 90s. Like, there did not have...
Which was Japanese only.
Yeah,
right?
And came in a giant monstrosity of a cab.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it really didn't make the rounds, and so the only way most people played it was that 32X version. And a lot of people kind of mistakenly thought, oh, this is kind of an upgraded port of the original arcade game, but it's not.
The one with the vector graphics.
Right, exactly. Yep. I actually have the arcade one up, a Star Wars cab, which has all 3 Atari arcade games. It's awesome.
I've thought of getting some of those. I thought of getting some of those arcade machines, but there's just no room in the apartment for them.
There's not much room here either, but I had to buy that one because of the fact that that game uses unique controls. Emulation has never like done the game's justice. So
there's a Burger Time one that I want, and I just don't have the room for it.
I wish that what I wish I had gotten a home port for him was with Star Wars Trilogy game that Sega put out, because they're very good.
Oh, I wish there would have been a Dreamcast port of that. I get you.
Yes, yeah, that would have been nice. But alrighty, well, so I'll finish up here then. So my experience with these games, I think I actually played these games back when they first came out, because I was 16 when the first game came out. So because I think I'm the oldest one here. I'm not sure, but yes, I already was a teenager when these games came out, and yeah, they're hard. I really liked them a lot because the fact I already was a Star Wars fan by that point. At that point, growing up my whole life with Star Wars, but I did play all 3 games. The 3 games back when they first came out, and beat 2 of them back then. I never did finish Empire back then until many years later when emulation helped with that process. But yeah, so I definitely have played most of the Star Wars games that came out in the 90s, whether it was like for NES, Game Boy, computer, Super NES, whatever. So, but all right. Well, very fun to have all of you here. Thanks again. As I said before, help you to keep this organized. I've used random.org to assign a random order for the 5 of us. I'm going to throw a topic out for like a discussion. We're going to go in turn. Each of us then will have a chance to. Each of them might have a chance to talk about the topic. So this will help prevent us from tripping over each other's words or whatnot. So the order for discussion in the podcast is going to be Liam, Will, myself, Arron, and Joe. So let's to open things up, let's talk about the game's graphics. Like overall, the graphics of the game Super NES. And by the way, these topics are going to include all 3 Super NES games. So we'll just bundle them together for the purposes of the discussion. So, all right. So Liam, you're up first. Take it away.
All right. So the graphics of these games, I can definitely say that the 2D side-scrolling parts of these games, they look okay. I wouldn't say they look anything too special. But personally, where these games shine, and I can definitely appreciate the hard work that the developers put into them, was the 3D sections. So, for example, in the first... it was the third game, it starts out with a stage where you've got to try and get to the end and avoid rocks and a couple of other things. I personally found that stage to be quite annoying, but graphically, I might make the comparison to Star Fox because I've played a lot of Star Fox in my time. Personally, I think the graphics hold up better than Star Fox does in terms of the 3D stages, because there's just a little bit more detailing like across the board, across all of the 3D stages, especially in the latter parts of Return of the Jedi, because some of those fight sequences close to the end of the game that where you're first person shooting TIE fighters, believe you me, when I saw that, I was really, really impressed. I just think overall, in terms of 2D, it could look a tiny bit better, but I can't help but applaud the fact that they tried really hard in the 3D sections to make it stand out, and as I say, I think it's aged better than Star Fox has.
Okay. Yep. Interesting. All right. Thank you very much there. So, Will, you're next.
Yeah, so to piggyback on like the ending of Return of the Jedi, they did a fantastic job with the with that. That was by far for the 3 games, that was the most impressive part of the graphics for the games.
Are you talking about the part where it's rotating an image around?
Yes, the rotating, the first-person perspective.
Yeah.
With the escape out of the Death Star in the Millennium Falcon. That looked really good. There's characters that they add into these games that they nailed it with how they look, and some of them I wondered, like, did they just go and grab a Star Wars encyclopedia to figure out what they were going to put into this game?
They had a lot of access, is what I understand.
Yeah, I mean, it was Lucasfilm Games, or LucasArts Games, that they're the ones that worked on it, so they probably knew exactly what was in these movies.
Oh, it was. I'm gonna correct you. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm
Go
always
ahead.
the corrector. Sculptured Software, and then I want to say.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. So it's Sculptured Software who developed all 3 games, and then I know LucasArts probably helped. Maybe provide assets and things.
They did.
Okay.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did help the development process. How much we don't know, but But yeah, the bread and butter of the game is Sculptured Software. As LucasArts wanted to make sure that hey, we don't want you putting anything in this game that does not fit with Star Wars, that et cetera, et cetera. So,
which makes me wonder with a couple of the bosses in this game that had nothing. Like, I don't think there's
they're
any
obscure.
equivalent.
I mean, one of the bosses in Super Star Wars, for example, comes from a chess piece that you see during the holographic.
Yes, and I was going to bring that up. He actually is a character. Like, his race is in the movies, but yes, he's also the chess piece, because that was one of the ones I looked up.
Yeah, there's some deep cuts here.
Yeah,
for sure, so.
As well as in the Sandcrawler, the Jawenko lava beast. As far as I can tell, that's an original creation for the game. But they've retconned it later to be native to Mustafar. And later on, ILM Labs used it for a VR project called Secrets of the Empire.
That's crazy.
So some of the stuff did get out there. The cantina, we were mentioning the boss from that, but the Tonica sisters are in the background in that, and there's never been figures of those characters. There's been, I think, a whole legal thing with them that they haven't been able to do figures of those characters.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, so, but awesome. Anything else you want to say for the graphics wheel before we move on?
I know there was some sprite swapping going on in Cloud City, which really had me wanting figures of these characters that showed up. There were red snowtroopers on Cloud City, and it's like, I don't ever recall those existing. I know we have the Emperor's Royal Guard, but those were not Royal Guards. Those were red snowtroopers. And another one real quick that was in Return of the Jedi. I am fairly certain that there was one battle against what are now called Dark Troopers. The bigger stormtroopers that showed up. Yeah, I'm pretty sure those are Dark Troopers, and I found a picture of one of the figures from the expanded universe that looks very similar to those.
Interesting. Yeah.
But yeah, they dug deep trying to get stuff for this game, and some of them looked really good. No, some of my favorites, the Tuskens didn't look too good. The Banthas looked awful.
Oh, yeah, they tried.
But when the Grands, when Reese the Grand shows up in Jabba's palace, I'm like, yes, he's in here, and he looked pretty good.
Yes, I agree. So, to piggyback off what you guys were just saying, yeah, the graphics of these games overall, I think are very, very good. I was definitely impressed with the graphics of the games when they first came out. I think they still hold up pretty well today. They're not the best graphics in the system, but they're very, very good. They're very solid. The sprite work behind everything is awesome. I really love the fine details that they put in all the characters. For example, you can see Luke's hair flipping in the background, flying in the wind and whatnot. So there's a lot of there are very small touches that the graphic artist did with the game that really really makes it stand out. Kind of shows the labor of love that the project was. I'm not as much a fan about the first person combat scenes, because why side is why I definitely like like being able to be the TIE fighter, fighting TIE fighters in the X-wing or the Millennium Falcon or whatnot. The Mode 7 effects that those use is a little bit like a little bit more slow and clunky. But for the most part, I don't think Mode 7 holds up anymore today as it used to. Joe and I have already talked about this before in past episodes, but just that it kind of feels a bit jarring to go from like the side-scrolling action that most of the games they compared to that instead of being in first person, because the game slows down in the first person for a viewpoint as well too. And the Mode 7, like I said, is kind of clunky these days, but I appreciate it for what it is. Because I think they could have done that action in like 2D as well too, but that that might have been a bit awkward. But I'm also like, but I also remember thinking way back when even, if I want to like blast TIE fighters, I would just load up X-wing by the PC, because that game does it much better than this does. But having said that, the graphics of this game are bright. They're colorful. Everything's recognizable. Like Liam Will said, there are some deep cuts here. A lot of like characters show up in the background or bosses or whatnot that really appreciate all the time and effort that was put into them. And the graphics of this game, since the game uses the same engine for the games use the same engine, the graphics look pretty similar across the board. I really don't think, for example, that Return of the Jedi looks that much more different than like the first game does, with a couple of like small tweaks here or there. But for the most part, graphics of this game are very nice. Definitely like a love letter to Star Wars fans, like in many ways, some of the hidden touches or whatnot. So Arron.
Oh, sure. Okay. So I would say, graphic-wise, I think that the graphics certainly look better than other 2D Star Wars games that had come out before then. You look back at stuff on the 2600. And then on the NES, and you kind of see how far graphics had come by that point. And the fact that they were able to do 2D and 3D sections, I thought was important, because all the other representations, except for the vector graphic versions of the games, it was all 2D, right? And so I liked that there was that variety. I liked the attention to detail that they were able to get in so many characters in a varied amount of artwork. There's a lot of nonsense in these games, though, in terms of the enemies you face. But I'm sure we'll get more into that. But I do like the inclusion of very obscure characters in the background. I like it when you enter a scene and they do there's a trick, especially Return of the Jedi, where it makes it look like almost like a mirage, or there's kind of a fuzziness because there's so much heat in the background, and there's layers of parallax, and there's things that overall add to the presentation that I do appreciate in those scenes. With the graphics and things they were going for, there is noticeable slowdown though when there are multiple objects on the screen. If you have too many projectiles going, the game will slow down. And I noticed that first in the first Star Wars game. Even on the first level, you get to the first boss, and if you face him with your pea shooter weapon, then because that weapon fires bullets or lasers so fast, there's no bullets in Star Wars, sorry. Whatever he's firing, it's so fast, there's so many objects flying on the screen that the game just kind of buckles, and you will find that. And I think it does get a little bit better by the time you get to Jedi, but that is kind of a noticeable issue. But because of the presentation, I think people were probably forgiving of it, and I'm a little forgiving of it, because there's just so much variety and so much going on. I will say I did notice on Return of the Jedi that I would almost guess that the first two games were probably made within about 6 months of each other because they're very similar. But Jedi's the one where their engine had matured enough to where you could see them using lighting tricks and shadow effects that were really neat and added a depth to the game that wasn't there in the first two. So I did appreciate that. And then I finally just want to touch on those Mode 7 graphics and say, yeah, that's probably the most dated aspect of these games. Just because it does kind of feel like I'm flying around on top of a 2D bitmap. And it doesn't really get that 3D effect that they were going for. And the sense of speed it's kind of wonky. Because there are some sections, like the land speeder section, where it speeds up and it slows down, and it's never a constant frame rate. And I think they improved that by Jedi, but I never loved those sections, even when I was a kid. They were cool at first, but then they just kind of, I don't know, they got tedious. But I do applaud Sculptured Software for trying, and nothing felt out of place, is what I would say. There is a cohesiveness across the games, and I applaud them for trying to present things. Like, one thing I did notice progressively was that the opening intro got better in each game, right? Where it was like the first opening cinematic, each one has that cool text scroll, which is awesome. I don't think anyone's mentioned that yet, but I love that they threw that in there. And so you've got the cinematic text scroll, and then, it goes into the background, and then the screen scrolls down. And in each game, it presents you a different scene. But it's the final one where they use a different technique to give you a depth of field where it looks like the ship is actually going into the screen. Whereas the first two games, it really is just like a drawing of a ship. And then you see lasers firing out of it, like into Hoth or Tatooine, right? Or they're sending things to Hoth, like probes. But it's that third one where they'd finally mastered the technology, and you get to see some impressive effects. But to Liam's point, and then I'll let you guys continue. To Liam's point, I just want to say, there is kind of a workman-like quality where I don't think these games match up graphically to the best of the Super Nintendo, but it's definitely way above average, is what I would say. There you go.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, just to add on real quick to what you're saying there, I do want to emphasize the fact these games did come out in a very rapid, short order, because Super Star Wars came out in November, like November of '92, like in North America, which it came out first. The game did get a worldwide release, but North America came out first. So yeah, so you keep in mind November '92 for Star Wars. Empire came out in June '93. And Jedi came out in June of '94. So yeah, within about 2 years, all three games came out. So just very rapid development cycles. But and last but definitely not least, Joe.
Well, the joys of going last is that you guys have all said everything I was going to say. So that makes my job a lot easier. But we're talking graphics. And so in comparison, I had Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back for the NES. That was my experience with video games at home. Because, of course, I'd been to the arcade and played, Star Wars Arcade and all that. So for me, with this experience, going to my friend's house and playing these first two games, Super Star Wars and Super Empire Strikes Back, compared to the NES 8-bit counterparts I had at home, these games blew my mind. The Mode 7 stuff was super cool at the time. I loved the size of the sprites, the multiple different characters they threw at you. Of course, back then I wasn't as deep into the lore as I am now, so I would just be like, oh, cool, more stormtroopers, they're just different colors, they just look different, and whatever. I didn't know that, they're like dark troopers, shadow troopers, whatever. I didn't know that at the time. So anyways, but yeah, I really enjoyed the graphical side of these games. It's almost like it's like when your best friend comes over and just kind of chills with you and you're playing couch co-op. Like, it's familiar and it just feels good. That's kind of how I feel like with the graphics with these games. Like, it's very Super NES looking. It is a little bit above average for when it came out, but if you look at the SNES library in general, this, I think, still falls kind of like in the middle of graphics wise, and I think it looks fine. And when we get down the line, we'll talk about whether they hold up today or not.
Cool, awesome. All right, guys, thank you very much. So, on to the next topic for us to talk about, much the same vein, the music and sound effects that the games use. Liam, go ahead, please.
So the music and sound design of this game, where do I start? The music is stunning. I have a film music degree, so I am familiar with the music of Star Wars. And I feel the first game did a pretty good job at kind of establishing the core themes that we use throughout the Star Wars films. But personally, the third one, when I booted up that title, when I booted up the game for the first time and saw that title theme, and I saw the artwork at the back as well, I literally had to question if it was still the same development team, because the music it kind of blew me away. Throughout all three of the games, I feel that they stick to the music really well. There are some times where I feel that the music kind of gets drowned out a little bit here and there, but in terms of the core themes, like the Cantina theme, which, I mean, who can not love the Cantina theme? The way that they are brought over to the sound chip on the Super Nintendo, they do make accommodations for it because of the fact that you could not get a full orchestra on the Super Nintendo. You could get like the synthesized orchestra, but I think the way that they transposed it was fantastic. There's very little in terms of music that I dislike. Sound effects as well, absolutely spot on. I mean, the sounds of the lightsabers, even the sounds of Leia getting hit, for example. Every single sound effect had a purpose. It felt authentic, and it just didn't seem out of place. But I mean, in terms of the overall mix as well, if we want to talk about the music and the mix in general, I feel that the music and the sound design, in terms of the audio balance, is also perfect. Because the problem they could have ran into is that because of how bombastic and how well known the themes are in Star Wars, they could have decided to have that higher, like louder in the audio mix. But I find that they balance it perfectly, so then you can still hear the music, you can still hear the sound design, and I feel that just overall as a sound package, it is one of the best on the Super Nintendo. I'm not going to lie. It's, in my opinion, where the game really shines, where all three games just shine through, because, as I say, they take these legendary themes and they're still recognizable, which isn't exactly easy to do when you're taking legendary themes like Star Wars and take them onto the sound chip that the SNES had.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much, Liam. It's hard going first the whole time, so I appreciate that.
That's all right.
Will, you're up next.
Yeah, so the music in A New Hope, the first game there's a couple points in it where, like, I'm familiar with a good chunk of where certain themes will be in the movies and where the scenes are. And there's one point on the Death Star where the music just didn't seem like it was the wrong music for that area. That they could have, I think it went from what it was and then switched to something else. I'm like, it doesn't quite sound right. But for the most part, yes, the music is absolutely fantastic. Those who are familiar more with the later releases of the movies might not recognize the music at the end of Return of the Jedi, because they went with the Yub Yub song instead of what they changed it to later on. So I thought that was a nice touch. When I got to the end of that game, I'm like, oh good, the original ending music is here. And if you want something really, really fun when it comes to the Cantina, Star Wars Holiday Special, the Cantina music is slowed down, and it's got lyrics sung by B. Arthur. Nice little piece of Star Wars that George Lucas wishes he could smash every copy of that special with a hammer. But graphics, not graphics, the sound effects to it, yeah, the sabers were spot on. Characters that needed to have voice had their voice. You had the Jawas going, "Ooh, TD." There was one point where Vader had his line, and there was a second and a half pause for the last part of what he was saying, and I can't remember what the line was, but that threw me off. I'm like, no, he's supposed to keep saying this, but it stops, and I'm not sure if maybe the video I was watching for that one, I was watching the video at the time, I don't know if the video screwed up, or there was just a glitch in how the person was playing it, whether it was emulation issues or whether it doesn't do it on the actual cartridge. I don't know. It was just something I picked up on that sounded a little off in the game. Well, other than that, they nailed it with a lot of the sound effects, and I can't think of any other sound effect that was wrong in there.
Yeah, great. Just to follow up, what I was saying, I totally agree. The music in the movies is awesome always anyway, of course, and it's really done very well here in the games. I thought I enjoyed the slight remixes that the music tunes were used in the game too, because in some cases it's not quite the same tune, but it's still very close. But the remixed versions are still still very good. Super NES, of course, has an awesome sound chip as well to boot. So the soundtracks really sound impressive. And the opening, the opening of the games, the combination of the scrolling text and the words and the music, you were watching a movie, is the combination of those two things together just is very awesomely done. It really helps set the scene for the game that's to come. So the sound effects are also perfect. I thought the blasters, the lightsabers, the voices, everything sounds right. They did an awesome job, converting the soundtrack over to the games. But then to be fair, I don't think I've heard it. But then to be fair, I don't think I've heard a Star Wars game with bad music. Even the ones that use some original music still sounds pretty good and Star Wars-ish.
I'm trying to remember if the Masters of Terras Casa game had bad music or not. I honestly can't remember.
It used a combination of both original music and also movie music. So
it's just been a while since
I've had decent music.
Yeah, it's been a while since I played that one.
It's kind of Castlevania game. There really is not a game like either franchise that has bad music. So it definitely sounds. It definitely sounds great here. Arron, you probably may know more about this than anybody else, given how you're given your history with working on chip tunes. What do you think?
Hey, am I coming through okay? Okay.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Sorry,
fine.
my Discord dropped again. All right. So I did get to hear everyone. Okay. So So chiptune wise, fantastic conversion. And I liked what Liam pointed out between the progression between the soundtracks and how they seem to get a better handle on their sample choice and just a little more background on what the Super Nintendo is actually doing. The Super Nintendo, unlike the Sega Genesis, the Super Nintendo is playing back banks of samples, right? And there's about 8 channels that it can use, and there can be stereo in all these channels, which means that you can have, positional sound, which was a big feature of these games, which, like, when you boot them up, they say presented in stereo. And so you've got that, and then the way it plays it back is they're samples. And typically for Super Nintendo music, they would take, the developer would take whatever synthesizer they had laying around, they could spring for one. And because these games had a big enough budget, unlike some of Sculptured Software's other games, these games sounded great. And they, if I read right, they used a few Ensoniq synthesizers, which are just like super high quality synthesizers and samplers. And so the choices, which it's all about choice, right? What, you can listen to the score, which I believe it was Paul Webb. He had access to John Williams' score and all the music, of course.
Yes.
But the ultimate thing is he's got to program it in, and then he's also got to select which patches sound right and how they mix together and the balance, as Liam mentioned. And that... that is a hard thing to do. I've done that in a small way, where if I've covered music that's out there and I'm making it into a chip tune, that's hard enough on any chip, because you've got the limitations of that machine, and you want to, especially with the Super Nintendo, you're trying to suspend the listener's disbelief. You want them to feel like they're hearing something that's an approximation of the actual score, which I think they pulled off very well. There are some things where, the horn section doesn't sound exactly like a horn section, but I think overall it's just really solid. The percussion is really, really good. You hear the timpanis, you hear the brass, you hear all the different sections of the orchestra conveyed, and that's one of the Super Nintendo's strengths in general, is that especially orchestral music, because it's all sampled, and because you're taking a sample of a real person playing it, or a keyboard where it was taking a real person in a lot of cases, you get that human quality. And I think if this game had come out on Sega Genesis, the soundtrack would have really suffered, because the Sega Genesis is just not as well suited for stringed instruments, and like violins and symphony type stuff. So I think that, like Liam said, best part of the game presentation wise is probably the music.
And to quickly add on the sound chip thing, I do agree with you on that, because if it was on the Genesis, the thing with the Genesis is it has more of like a deep guttural sort of sound. It's always I've always found that any attempts to make like stringed instruments or that sort of thing just comes off sounding either, I've always found it just sounds too harsh, and it just does not match what they were trying to go for.
Interesting you called it Genesis, like my Mega Drive.
I'm used to calling it Genesis by now, trust me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that technical insight there, Arron. I really appreciate it. And the Super NES sound chip is great, but one of the things the one thing they can't do very well is horns. I mean, like, any game that requires a horn sound, it sounds like pretty bad.
Yeah, Genesis can do horns better with FM synthesis in general. And so you'll find some Super Nintendo games where they will literally sample FM synthesis horns. I think Knights of the Round is a great example. If you ever play that game, you're like, oh, wow, this kind of has the sound of a Sega Genesis game or an arcade game of the time, and it's because they sampled the FM chip from the arcade board. But yeah, horns is kind of a struggle with because of the complexity of the sample, because you have to have a much bigger sample to really capture the nuance of that instrument. Whereas if it
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
and I'm just going to say, whereas with FM synthesis, because it's being generated off the chip and the complexity of how FM works, it comes across better that way. All right, go ahead.
And I'm wondering if the sampling. I'm wondering if the sampling is what caused the problem with Vader. I found the clip. It's on Cloud City, and he's when he goes, "The Force is with you, young Skywalker."
Oh, and there was
what's the pause in there?
Yeah, and it could be. I did notice Jedi of the three is the one where they had more space to do dialogue, which I thought was great. But yeah, I'm not sure why that got cut off. I did forget to mention, though, with the sound effects, there's one sound effect or two that are just so annoying that I wish they would have just reduced the volume of or changed the sound effect. And it's especially in Jedi when you're running through and you pick up a certain power-up and it's just, they mixed it really loud compared to everything else. And I don't know why.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, okay, yeah.
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 One other quick example of that would be the hearts pickup in the first Super Star Wars game, because it's, everything sounds good, and all you hear is this, don't!
Yeah, it's like there's so much going on that it seems like they really want to get your attention. Like, oh, okay, I picked that thing up, got it.
Yeah.
But I did love my favorite sound effect in all the games is probably the foom, foom, the sound of the lightsaber.
Yeah. That is a very good sounding lightsaber. But think like an older game, because modern games have modern games. Like, I'm not sure if anybody else here has played it's like Fallen Jedi. The lightsaber sounds awesome in that game. And it's like but the lightsaber. Yeah, lightsaber sound effects in these games for games to the 90s does sound very good.
I have it in my collection, but I haven't played it yet.
Yeah, you should. It's a fun game.
Oh, I plan to play it. I just haven't gotten around to it yet.
But and then finally they finish up this topic. Joe.
Again, great to be last. Yeah, so I really enjoyed the music and sound effects for the most part in these games. I felt they caught the essence of what Star Wars was in the game, and in my opinion, I think this is where LucasArts comes into play. Sculpted Software did a good job as far as converting the story of the movie to the game, but I'm pretty sure it's LucasArts that's taking the music and cutting it down, or taking the samples and giving it to them so that they can put it into the game and make it all work. Same with the sound effects, and I agree the lightsaber sound effect is probably one of the most satisfying sound effects in this trilogy for sure. The Emperor's Lightning's not too bad either, and then you get the Death Stars blowing up and everything else. So overall, I really enjoyed the music and sound effects of the game.
Cool, awesome. So next, I'm not sure what topic we should cover next, because they all seem very viable at this point. So I'm going to let Joe decide what topic to Lucia hash out next?
Well, since I kind of already touched on it, we might as well talk about how faithful they are to the movies, and do we mind that they've kind of deviated a bit?
I made notes.
Good choice. Go ahead, Liam. Get us started with this one.
For me, I can't have too much of an opinion about this because I obviously have not watched the movies. But from what I vaguely know, there does seem to be quite a few liberties that were taken. Even just speaking offline before the show, I've heard a few things of certain things being added. I mean, the only one that springs to mind that I know vaguely about would be the Sandwalker in the New Hope. I don't think R2-D2 was actually saved from the Sandwalker. I believe he just went along, but sadly I can't offer too much because I haven't seen the film, so this is more a topic for everybody else.
Yeah, I definitely wrote that one down.
Well, fair enough, Liam. That's okay. Will, if I go ahead then.
All right, so yeah, the game's starting out with Luke going through the desert and finding C-3PO out by the escape pod, and him saying that the Jawas took R2. No.
Nope.
No. The escape pod comes down. They go wandering on their own. Basically, they're both taken by the Jawas, and the Jawas clean them up, and they bring them to the Lars Moisture Farm, where Uncle Owen picks the two out, and then Luke cleans them up, and R2 runs off. And that's when you get to the point with the Tusken Raiders and meeting up with Obi-Wan. Luke doesn't go through a sandcrawler to get R2. He doesn't track down through the land of the Sand People where he finds Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan doesn't simply say, "Here is your lightsaber."
Yep, here you go.
You're
a Jedi Knight. Way to go.
It's like, no. It's like, no, this is your father's lightsaber. The escape from Tatooine to go rescue Leia. They're going to Alderaan, and they end up in what they think is an asteroid field, and it's actually the debris of Alderaan. And that's when they see the Death Star, and the Death Star picks them up. They don't go to the Death Star like this game makes it sound. I mean, they have to change some stuff to kind of keep the game flowing, but there's like levels they added into the games that were not in these games at all. They were not in the movies at all. There's whole sections of Cloud City that were not really seen. It's really weird how they went and did that. Although I will say the idea of Return of the Jedi having Wicket play a level with him, and Arron will probably speak more to that one. But one of the bosses was who was it? I wrote it down here. It was EV-99 as a boss for Wicket to fight. I'm like, that's one of the droids from Jabba's palace. Why is he here? But yeah, they really condensed down the story for the games to try to keep stuff flowing. Like, I am wondering, when it comes to a gameplay perspective, if you had never seen the movies and you get to the part with the AT-ATs, if you know nothing about the movies, do you know what to do there?
Oh, no.
Because it seems like I wouldn't know what to do.
You're dropping down a rope.
For those listening who for those who probably have never seen the movies, they take the AT-ATs down by shooting a tow cable and wrapping the cable around their legs so that they fall. But that's not explained in the game at all. So that was a little bit of a sticking point. I'm like, do people know? And like the big spoiler for Empire, never mentioned in the game. And I think it's mentioned very briefly in Return of the Jedi in the game. I'm like, you guys skipped stuff.
Yeah, it's actually like a it's actually like a great point. Liam, did you know what to do with the AT-ATs?
I don't think I actually got that far, as we'll explain later with the difficulty of these games.
Fair enough.
Although I will say, leading on from what Will just said, there were times where certain parts of the game, the way that the game kind of flipped things on a dime, it was just very much just like, do the Star Wars games really follow this kind of a story? Because if they do, maybe the movies are not for me.
I would say definitely watch Star Wars: A New Hope, the original movie, if you've played through the game, and see what's changed through there. That would probably be the one to go to see where all these changes are.
Like, I thought, to be fair, the story of that movie is big enough, it's always big enough that you drive a truck through.
But when you say things were skipped, I can't help but just think of like what they did with the fourth Harry Potter film, where they skip 100 pages. That's the only comparison I can make.
Oh well, yeah. It's a bit different. It's a bit different trying to, following at that point. Since I was going to say this anyway. It's always hard to convert a movie to a game. I mean, people have been struggling with that for years. They struggle with it these days. But I think it's a bit easier to convert a movie to a game than it is trying to convert a book to a game, because like so much books so much what's in books gets cut out anyway. But at least with movies like a bit easier. But so I don't think it's quite as bad with, like, your point of Harry Potter. I don't think it's quite as bad trying to make a game based off a book, a game based off a movie compared to, like, a game based off a book. But having said that, there are major points missing, changed around, additional stuff added, and I'm of mixed minds about this. I understand that I understand the development process. I understand what the developers are going through. It's not easy trying to convert, trying to make a game. A movie to a game, and even the Star Wars movies lend themselves pretty well to gameplay, because other games have done this too over the years, because Star Wars has been out for so long. The movies themselves do work pretty well for game conversions. There still was a struggle with them trying to decide what to include, especially with the limited space that the cards had, because you always have to remember, these are not like these are not like CD-based games that we have nowadays, where space really is an issue. They really had to crunch and condense the stuff onto the cards. There were stages, for example, that were cut out from Super Star Wars because there simply wasn't room to include them on the cards. They decided that other parts are more important. So, I think, for the most part, I think what's in the games works. It at least follows. It follows the storyline enough, and I am thankful for the cutscenes. The cutscenes also, I think, are important, because the cutscenes at least help to tie the story together. So at least it flows. It does. The cutscenes help the games to follow the movie process better than the cutscenes have not been included in the first place. So I am glad that they're there as well too, because they work pretty well together. That said, I think Super Star Wars is probably the worst offender. I think that I think Empire and Empire: Return of the Jedi do a better job of following the overall movie plot line than the first game does. Maybe because they realized after the fact that maybe we kind of took too many liberties with Super Star Wars. The liberties are reduced in the later games. Also, I think that the later games had a bit more card space to work with. I could not confirm that anywhere.
Just the third
online,
one.
But I believe
just Jedi.
Oh.
Jedi is a 2 meg cart. I want to say the first two are
okay.
1. At least when I played. I used to own these, but I'm playing them now on an EverDrive, and when I pull them up in the listing, first 2 show up as 1, and last one shows up as 2.
That makes sense then, because the Jedi definitely does seem like it flows, follows the overall theme of the overall theme of the movie best. But it's like I really don't care that much. What's here is fun. It works. You had the critical parts. the critical parts of the movie, the critical parts of the movie here. It's like just think of their stuff as being like deleted scenes or whatever you want to think of it that way. So
yeah, because I figured they didn't want to add like additional characters to play as, because I certainly would have started out the first game with fighting on the ship as a as one of the rebel fighters, but maybe do like a palette swap of Han for that.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, and then follow that with the escape pods leaving.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, but yeah, like taking liberties of the story is not a new thing. My final point before I hand it over to Arron, I was like, I don't know. So I don't know. So I don't know if you guys have listened to the National Public Radio conversions of Star Wars movies. They also deviated quite a bit, like in the movies.
They also had, I think it was the Return of the Jedi one, didn't have Mark Hamill come back to do his role.
The last one.
Yes, because when he came back to do Empire, he was lied to in terms of what the contract was, so he didn't come back for the third one.
I not heard that. Interesting. Okay, but yeah. So anyway, Arron, what do you have to say about this?
So I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, these are video games first and foremost, and I think the producer of the team really has to juggle. It's a monumental task, especially for such a series of Star Wars, right? This blockbuster franchise that changed movies forever and changed the trajectory of video games in a lot of ways. There's a lot of expectation to live up to. I can forgive them for playing fast and loose with the story, because almost every Star Wars game before these did the same thing in its own way, where it's like, we're going to give you the Cliff Notes version, or we're going to give you the version of the story that an 8-year-old remembers the first time they went to the theater seeing the movie. They remember all the cool stuff, right? All of the whiz-bang, things blowing up, cool stuff happening moment to moment, because, let's be honest, if this game was bogged down by long cutscenes and long bits of read out dialogue, then people would space out. They would, possibly want to take the game back because there's too much reading, right? Especially Western audiences around that time. This game has so much reading. So I kind of like the brevity of the cutscenes. I'm glad they included them. I do think it's problematic that the first game sort of gives you the story, the long crawl, and then there's no connection between why you're Luke in the first place and why you're kind of just a murderous dude on a desert planet. There's no explanation of that unless I just didn't look in the manual. But that's okay. It's ultimately okay because the game knows what it is. All three of these, they are a run and gun game with shooter sequences interspersed throughout to break up the variety. And I think that's okay. I'm at peace that it doesn't exactly follow the movies. I think that's okay, because I think throughout the history of video games and the medium, developers have had to find ways to either do their own thing or do things well enough that people are okay that they took liberties. And I think it worked out okay here.
Okay. Joe, I imagine you probably have strong thoughts about this too.
Actually, I don't. So it's kind of what everybody else said. Like, it's a video game. I do not expect a game based on a movie to follow the movie beat by beat, unless it is structured like an RPG.
Right.
Now, if we had Super Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi as RPGs, yes, I expect that to be every single bit of that movie in the dialogue, in the cutscenes, in the action, and it better be accurate. Which, by the way, like, why have we not got a Star Wars RPG outside of, like, you know, the 3D stuff that we've already had? Like, why did nothing come out in this 8 or 16-bit era? It's beyond me. Anyways, other than that, I am completely okay with the deviations. Now, the one thing that stood out to me, which I noticed nobody mentioned, which is crazy because this stuck out to me like a sore thumb, was how is it that in Super Star Wars, ED-209 is a enemy, a boss at that?
Remind me, because I'm not as deep on my lore, who ED-209 is.
Oh, that, yes.
It's
I
it's right
think
after
what they, So I think what they did is they just made something and didn't realize it looked a little too close to something else.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking. It's like a two-legged walker that looks literally like RoboCop's big bad in the first.
Ed 209, yeah.
So, I don't know. I came across that and I was just like, oh, we're in RoboCop now. Okay, whatever. It's a video game.
In fact, I think I wrote it down here. Imperial Defense Droid, made up.
There you go.
Like, made up for them, but yes, it looked a lot like Ed 209.
I didn't even write the real name. I just wrote Ed 209 exclamation point like four times. I was like, needs to be mentioned.
And can I cut in one more thing that I forgot to mention? Was that nothing in these games is anywhere near as egregious as what happened in Star Wars, the Famicom game, where Darth Vader literally throws out some kanji and turns into a scorpion.
Yep.
In fact, when this game first starts, it looks like it's going to be a recreation of that game because it's out in the desert. There's scorpions around.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, that Star Wars. Yeah, the Japanese Star Wars Famicom game.
It's a trip.
Yeah, but it's so good and satisfying.
One hit kills
at the same time.
That's fun. I like it more than the Beam Software one that we got.
Agreed.
Wasn't the second Master System for wasn't the second Master System Star Wars game that same game, the Japanese version?
I wanted to say that was also the Western one, but I could be wrong.
I'll have to look into that further. Awesome. Okay. Anything else, Joe?
No, that's really all that I had to say. Like I said, everybody's pretty much covered everything, but like I couldn't believe nobody mentioned Ed 209. That's all. Like that just blew my mind.
All right. Awesome. All right. Thank you. I think again a good segue to the next topic at this point would be let's talk about our favorite characters to play as, our favorite stages, and favorite game, the favorite game like on the trilogy. So, because just to kind of give some reference here, you don't have any choice for characters in Super Star Wars. However, like the other two games, you are able to play as different characters, which is a nice touch I think that they added in like the later games. In Empire, you're able to play as either Luke, Han, or Chewbacca, and then in Jedi, you're able to play as either certain stages limit you to certain characters in this one, but but overall the character roster in that game includes like Luke, Han, Chewbacca, Leia, and Wicket. So let's talk about then favorite characters, favorite stages, and favorite game period. Liam, go ahead, please.
This one is one of my favorite questions, simply because it's got to be Leia. I love the design of Leia in Return of the Jedi. For some reason, they introduced a double jump, which, for some reason, whenever I played Leia, she reminded me, for some reason, of like a Star Wars version of Samus, almost. Because when she does that double jump, she kind of gets like that shield around her. It's almost like a Shine Spark attack, almost. My favourite of the three games, I would most likely say... I'll say it's the first one, because it was one I managed to get the furthest into. But in terms of my favourite stages, I would say that I love the detail inside the Sandwalker. I love the grittier, darker colours for the interior, but I also like the fact that there are some things in the foreground that doesn't make it look like it's just one colour in the background. I do think that some of the stage designs, in terms of the general backgrounds, were pretty good actually. It was the main part of it was those parts of the graphics that really stood out to me. But as I say, it's got to be Leia, because, I mean, did you ever think you'd be able to play someone that acts like Samus but controls better than her? I think the answer to that most likely is a no. But trust me, when I go back to play these games again, which I most likely will, Leia is just going to be the character to play, because, you know, she's also got a certain flair as well when she jumps. You know, it's the fact that she just starts to spin. It almost gives me Sonic vibes as well with how fast she spins. It's almost like the lack of gravity on these planets that she's on almost gives her like this gymnastic sort of look to her as well.
Well, what about an Empire then? I don't have it like available. Who's your favorite character to use there?
I will admit again, as we talk about in the difficulty later, I couldn't get out the first stage of that.
Okay.
I will say, in terms of the characters, I do like the part where you're on Tauntaun. I do think that I think him as a character is great, because of the fact that if you try and go through that stage as Luke, you're going to get absolutely destroyed. But Tauntaun kind of offers a little bit of relief. It kind of makes it a little bit more bearable. But in terms, as I say, just overall favorite character, it's got to be Leia.
Okay, got it. Let me also make a quick correction here before I move on. I forgot in Super Star Wars later on in the game, you do get the ability to control Han Chewbacca. Just like an Empire, I believe I think you get the ability to switch them immediately from the game start. Whereas in Star Wars, once the characters get introduced to you as part of the story, then you're able to switch over to them. So I did forget about that part. So I just want to make that correction now before anybody in case anybody's yelling at their
why
pod players or whatever out there. So, but Will, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I think by far my favorite character to play in this is Chewbacca. He's got that spin move that, and not the same type of spin move that Leia has, but it's kind of like Zangief's spin that he does in Street
spinning
Fighter.
lariat, yeah.
The spinning lariat. He does that, and it works really well to try to get through. Like if you have a really tough enemy to defeat, like he can make quick work of them. One thing to note with Leia, like later on in the game, she has a completely different outfit and her playstyle is slightly different. So that'll be something to look at too with how Leia plays. But Chewbacca, like his bowcaster, I think that's the most I've ever seen him use it. I think if I recall, he only really uses it like once in the original trilogy, and then he's using it in the sequel trilogy. And that's about it.
I don't remember him using it. Yeah, I don't remember him using it at all, like the original movies.
I feel like he used it on Endor, but maybe he didn't. It's probably a false memory. Okay. But he does use it in episode 7.
7, yeah, Force Awakens.
Yes,
yeah.
He does use it in episode 7. Right. Because people talk about how that's a really powerful weapon. And they make
it is, yeah. Like Engage is awesome.
And they kind of joke about that in episode 7. Yeah, they with Han being able to use it. But I thought, and according to the lore, nobody else except for the Wookiees are strong enough to be able to use it.
Ah, okay. I did not know that.
I'd have to look it up. It could be something that was retconned or. But yeah, he's a great character to play as. And
And what's your favorite game?
I think all 3. Like he's playable in all 3 games. So, once I get to.
No, sorry. Yeah. What I meant was, out of these 3 games, which one's your favorites?
I may have to go with Return of the Jedi because of how more polished it is. Yeah. But right. Yeah, the Super Star Wars is a little easier to play than Empire or Return.
And
it's definitely easier than Empire by a country.
Empire, I mean, it's just like, you know what? You start any game with an ice level, you're looking for trouble.
Yep.
Yeah, Empire I got as far as the probe droid fight. And
would your favorite stage be in Jedi Fallen Order 2 then?
Ooh. I liked Jabba's Palace. Jabba's Palace was
cool,
plus
yes.
all the characters in the background, and the fact that they actually got characters from the movies, like they dug and grabbed characters from there to fill it out. That was great.
Yeah. You and I are pretty like minds as far as this goes, Will. I think that I think Chewbacca is my favorite character to play in these games as well too, because he is just so strong and just like the attacks are very nice. The bowcaster is a great weapon to use. I really like using him. I also enjoy playing for the one stage you can do it with. I really do enjoy playing as Wicket in Jedi, just because it's just being the novelty. Because like you can't. There's only one other game I'm aware of. We actually get to play. Play as an Ewok. So just the novelty of playing as an Ewok in the games play pretty cool. So
I almost feel like one of the
aspect.
Battlefront games you could.
Yes. Yep. That's the other game I was thinking about. Yes. That is cool. Return's my favorite game of the series. I think part of it's because Return's my favorite movie of the franchise, period. But also because I think that Return, they did make improvements to the game, as you people have already mentioned. With that I really think I like all three games, but I think the enhancements that they made in Return, as well as the extra space, the card space, did make. Sure, didn't make the best, but the best polished product. Favorite stages? That's a tough one. The Jabba's Palace in Star Wars is very good. I also really like the final stages in Jedi with the Jedi like the Death Star, and also like the Emperor's throne room, the double boss fight there. That's also like a very cool background design set that really appeals to me. So. But anyway, moving on now to Arron.
All right. So let's see. My favorite character would probably also be Chewbacca, and I kind of like in the first game that they tell you the height of each character, because you get to kind of see like, oh, Luke is 5'9", and Han Solo is 6 feet tall, and Chewbacca is 8 feet tall. And just the gargantuanness of him. He moves a little bit slower, but guys, in these games, moving slower is actually better. Because what's going to happen in these games is there's stuff flying around you all the time from weird angles. I felt the most in control when I was Chewbacca. I appreciated that he could still slide, which is the funniest thing to see him slide. And I did appreciate that he could double jump in later games, and they did fix a little bit of the wonkiness there. And I do like that spin move he does. I want to say Leia was a close second. Han Solo, I think, is the worst character in all of these games. And Wicket is kind of there only because his attack is just not great. Him shooting his arrows are just not fast enough, and there's too many enemies coming at you. But Han Solo, the problem with him is, I think his weapon always starts out a little better than Luke's, but because he doesn't have the lightsaber, by the time you get him, there's just like not much point of playing as Han Solo unless they force you to. He really doesn't differentiate himself as much. Luke's got by that point, he's got a lightsaber that he can switch. In the first two, he can switch between the lightsaber and the blaster. And then I want to say Han Solo just has his blaster, and he doesn't really have much that makes him unique in that regard. Even though he's like my favorite character in the Star Wars movies, he doesn't really have as much to differentiate him here. And then my overall favorite game, for nostalgia, I would probably say the first game because that's the one I played the most of and I had the most memories of. But if I'm looking back now, Jedi just has the best presentation, the tightest level design, and the most variety. So I think that about sums it up for me.
Okay, awesome. And then finally, Joe.
All right. So, well, I think I've already explained my love for the lightsaber sound. So, obviously, I played as Luke, like every possibility that I had. As far as highlights go, with the different games, I really enjoyed the boss fight with Vader at the end of Empire. I did cheat my butt off to get there, and I did use Game Genie to stay alive to be able to beat Vader. So I definitely agree with the difficulty of these games. The final boss fight in Super Return of the Jedi, where you got to fight Vader and the Emperor, is just fantastic. I love that section, and yeah, I mean, it's Luke. I play as Luke every single time. When I am forced to change, it's, you know, maybe Chewbacca. But Leia in Return of the Jedi is very agile. She is fun to use when you have the opportunity to use her. So I will echo that sentiment as well. It's just I feel like when you're Luke, you can do like the same sort of double jump, and you're swinging the lightsaber, so it's kind of the same thing that Leia can do. But it's
we didn't mention his
in my opinion.
We didn't mention his move he gains in Jedi, where he can move the weapon around the screen, right?
Yes,
yeah,
awesome.
Yep.
That force power, which they kind of changed it from the other games, because the first two he just switches to his blaster, but I thought that that gave it a little more nuance and variety, to make it that he had to go pick up force power ups, which, you know, I don't remember that in the movies, but maybe they were there, you know, picking up force power ups.
Yeah.
Get the power ups you win.
Like, it is implied in the movies that, you know, that it does use a lot of like mental power to use force powers constantly. So I guess they're trying to. So I guess the games are trying to give kind of a physical aspect to that.
I mean, I guess it's true. I mean, Luke fell asleep in the Ewok village and made C-3PO float. So I mean, you know.
And to quickly echo on Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi, he would be my second favourite, because I found out about a couple of hours before recording that he actually has different types of force power. So he could do like the throne of the lightsaber, but he also has a force power that can actually heal him. And I think that really made getting through some parts of Return of the Jedi a little bit more bearable, because being able to heal on the fly it's something that, you know, when I swapped back to Leia, I was trying to heal. I was like, why am I not healing? Like, oh, because Leia can't do that. But
yeah, but awesome. Thanks again, everybody, for weighing in on that. Once again, Joe, I think we could probably transition to any topic at this point. The ones we have left for discussion would be like, you know, difficulty factors, how the games hold up, just those two. So I'll let you decide which one to talk about next.
I actually kind of figure those topics go hand in hand. So why don't we talk about how hard these games really are, and then we'll go to whether they hold up or not.
Sounds good. All right, so topic up next. Overall, the difficulty of these games, and your struggles with them thereof, and how they compare to other games you played, and if you think the game's too difficult or not. Liam, go ahead, please.
Oh, I have a lot to say about the difficulty of these games. Let me just say, coming into these games without any knowledge of the franchise kind of hindered me a little bit. So I will say, the thing I've noticed with some of the game, with the first game especially, the game kind of eases you in quite nicely. You get through the first couple of stages, and I was thinking, this game may not be too bad. But once you get inside the Sandwalker, the game's just like, nope, you're not getting any further than this. And I think that's the core problem with the difficulty of these games, is that sometimes it eases you in. It kind of gives you that feeling of, I can get used to this, but then you hit this brick wall where the game is like, if you want to get past me now, you're going to have to work your backside off. I just think that my main problem with the difficulty of these games is that the first game builds it up, but the second and third game, they just start out on such a steep learning curve that for someone who isn't,
light on,
was not familiar with the characters or the lore or, the sort of different things that these characters could do, it very much felt like I was trying to get over a brick wall before I'd even got started. One thing that drove me absolutely bonkers, and I think it's the case on the first two games, I can't be 100% sure on the third game, it's the infinitely spawning enemies. Yeah. Because you move like 2 feet and the enemies you just destroyed are like, you didn't get me, I'm back now. And you just think that the way that I got over this, ironically, was to actually try and speedrun the stages, because if you get a shield power up, you can literally just run through everything. If you don't get that shield power up, then you're stuck fighting the same enemy for like a minute and a half. You just think to yourself, is this a run and gun game, or is this like a turret shooter that I'm playing here, like a tower defense sort of title? If they didn't have the respawning enemies in these games, I feel like it would be somewhat more bearable. But due to the fact that they just carry on and on and on, it's almost like there's a hole in the ground behind the stage that these enemies keep coming out of. It's almost like one of the things from you see in Mario, where the enemies just keep coming and coming.
Like a gauntlet generator.
Yeah, gauntlet generator is the best way to describe it. I feel if they didn't have that repetitiveness of these enemies constantly spawning in front of you, then these games would have been more bearable. The other thing, and it's in Empire and Return of the Jedi, more prevalent in Empire I found, was there were so many occasions where there were things that are at the bottom of the stage that suddenly spring up in front of you. Stuff like in the stages I played, like the ice that suddenly just pierces up in front of you. If you've got an enemy to the left of you, you're kind of just stuck in the middle. It's also the same with the in Return of the Jedi on the first stage, where you're walking past and suddenly you just get hit by rocks, and it isn't until after you realise that there's this really well hidden switch. There's a 50-50 chance of either dropping a boulder on your head or a free full heal. I just feel that if they had streamlined the difficulty, got rid of the respawning enemies, kind of make it that little bit fairer, rather than starting like you're trying to climb a brick wall with anti-climb paint on it, then perhaps I would have enjoyed these games a lot more. But they just start out way too steep in terms of difficulty, and they just don't ease up.
But okay, that's some very good strong thoughts to open up a discussion with. So thank you. I'm sure probably you helped many others. Will, you're up next.
Yeah, piggybacking on that, these games are really tough, and I'm not sure if anybody else had noticed. If you go into the settings, there's you can change the difficulty, And even on
Yes, you
even
can.
on easy, it's difficult.
It is, and I recommend everyone change it to easy if you want to actually have fun playing these games.
Yeah, because on the higher difficulty, it's like you get hit once, and the amount of hearts you need to get to refuel that one hit is it's I think it's like 2 or 3 to refill it. I think it's like 2 on normal, maybe 3 on difficult. But on easy, it's like, oh, I got hit, I got a heart, I'm at full health now. And you can get through some of the areas getting hit, getting a heart, because a lot of stuff, especially in the first game, gives you hearts. So that you can kind of rely on at first, but it doesn't last. Especially with the stuff that just pops up out of nowhere. Or especially in Return of the Jedi, trying to get through part of Jabba's palace. There's just this part where you're doing these intricate jumps, and you get to a spot, okay, I'm safe. Nope, here comes this piece out of the wall that's going to hit you, and now you have to try and jump past these spikes to get up past this area. And the first level of Return of the Jedi has the... you start falling, it's like you don't know if you're going to land on something and you're going to be safe, or you're going to drop right to the bottom of the stage. And you can look, you can use the L and R buttons to look to see where you're going, but it doesn't always help. They've really spiked it.
And that
Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Sorry, that also reminds me of the first stage of Empire, when you're on Tauntaun. Right close to the end of the stage, if you get hit by an enemy mid-jump, you fall down a chasm. You literally fall down the chasm that you can't get out of.
And there's there are some chasms in the game. There's some, and I noticed this in a couple areas. There's hidden areas in these games, and especially that first stage actually has a spot you can fall down in with a platform you don't see, kind of like at the end of Super Castlevania, and you can just get some power-ups from that. But I don't know where a lot of them are in the game. I think I noticed a couple of them in Empire, and that was it.
Okay. Yeah. So I kind of have, again, mixed feelings about this because like I said before, I did beat two of these games back when they first came out in the 90s. I was able to finish Star Wars. I was able to finish Return of the Jedi. Empire was the only one I was not able to finish, and therefore, because of that reason, I still think Empire is the hardest out of 3 games. That said, these 3 games all are very difficult. I think, however, the difficulty of these games may be a little bit overhyped because yes, there are hard games, but I can think of harder. But I definitely can think of harder games for sure on the system because you have to remember, basically these games are platformers. Platformers are supposed to be tough. Platformers are supposed to be one of the hardest types of games that you can play, period. So, I mean, they've always been that way, going back to the 80s. So, and during the 90s was the golden age of, platformers for systems like the NES, Super NES, PC, whatever. So, it's like, if you don't enjoy platformers, you're going to struggle with this game, because I think that a lot of people who enjoy Star Wars are going to pick up this game and then wanting to play it and be turned off because of the difficulty. This is not these games are definitely not recommended games to play if you don't like platformers to begin with. Even if you're a big Star Wars fan, you have to like and be good at platformers to really be able to enjoy these games. And yes, luckily there are cheat codes and cheats you can use and save states and whatever to make the games easier for you. But still, having said that, in that context, however, for platformers, they're hard games. They're not the hardest platform games I play. There are other games I think that are harder as far as platform elements go. But and they're also supposed to be challenging, but you have to remember, these games were $50-$60 like they came out back then. You wanted a game that you want a game that's going to last you. You want a game that's going to last you a good long while. So if the game was too easy, then you'd have your money wasted, which happened many times with many games. Weirdly, I would say these games are both good. You are both like good for a purchase and also good for rental back then, because it's like a weekend rental would at least give you a chance to play the games and see how they were and decide if you wanted to buy them or not. So I think this is one of the rare cases of some games that are very neatly fit in like both categories, being like ideal for both areas. That said, like the difficulty I do think ramps up very nicely throughout the games. And I actually think that for the most part, I think that Return is the easiest game of the three games because of the enhancements and changes that the developers made to the that game, and also because of the different characters, the power-ups, the force bows you have more knives in your shed to work with in that game than the past two games, which just help the overall difficulty. That said, these games do have some brutal boss fights. Some of these boss fights are some of the most challenging boss fights I think I've played, period, in some games. Especially the double boss fight in Jedi between between Darth Vader and the Emperor. I can't tell you how long it took me. I gotta tell you how long it took me as a teenager back when the game came out to finish those boss fights. It took me days of struggling before I looked like a passo. So yeah, the boss fights of these games are definitely the most challenging in games, period. But overall difficulty, I still think the games overall are tough but fair. So, but sorry, go ahead, please.
Sorry, and now I will say, in terms of the hardest games on the Super Nintendo, these are not up there. When I say these games are really difficult, in terms of platformer games of the Super Nintendo, they're definitely not easy.
Yes.
There are a couple of Japanese RPGs that spring to mind when I think about extreme difficulty, like Arron may know this one, Kiryaku Megami Tensei.
Yep.
But basically, the first enemy in that game, you could either defeat it, level up, or just get wiped out.
Right. So, yeah. Thank you for writing onto that. Arron,
sure.
Go ahead,
yeah. So just to piggyback off what you were saying, Greg, these are hard games, and I think there's a nuance to the difficulty where a modern example would be, Dark Souls, Demon Souls, where it's tough but fair, where every obstacle is very planned out and there's workarounds for everything. In these games, they give you that sense of power, especially like once Luke gets his lightsaber and has a different amount of tools. The biggest problem I have, though, is that there's like a slight hiccup in your jump, especially in the first one. They fixed it later. There's a hiccup in your jump that makes the controls there slightly frustrating. Enemies are just coming at you from every angle randomly. It feels very random, and that the encounters in the game, with exception of the bosses, there's not a ton of thought put into how many enemies are going to spawn in this area and how many are going to come out to meet you. It's just like, let's just throw as many sprites on the screen as we can. We're going to have birds and all sorts of stuff low to the ground that's hard to shoot. Especially in that first game, you couldn't shoot diagonally down if you were jumping, which was frustrating. You couldn't double jump. So there were just things in these games that make it, I think, artificially more difficult in a way. Where it's, I've played hard games, like, the hardest Castlevania games, where, okay, there's some wonky design decisions, but it still feels manageable, especially if I've powered up my whip enough. In this game, most of the time you feel pretty powered up, but it's just like every level is too long, right? It's about 5 minutes too long, it feels like. Like if they'd cut out each level by a third, maybe, then that would have helped with the difficulty a little bit. And then I think if there had been a little more playtesting in that regard, But I get your point, Greg, about you want people to get their money's worth, and if you're playing a platformer and you've seen everything before, oh, Contra, I mastered that game. What do you got? What's next? In this one, they want to be like the end all be all. But I think Sculptured Software kind of used some of their design philosophies from past games they'd worked on. The biggest one I could think of is Stanley. This is an obscure one. Stanley, The Search for Dr. Livingston on NES. If you ever played that one, they developed that one. And the enemy design feels just as random, where you encounter these creatures and they're constantly respawning and coming from all angles that just make it hard to navigate. So finally, I would say Return of the Jedi balances out things the best. The jumping got better. Platforming, great. I still don't like Will said, I don't like the the view where it's hard to see certain things, and so sometimes you are making blind jumps. But I will say finally that I do like that the game gives you plenty of lives and ways to gain extra lives through the score system, through pickups. I do like that there's hearts you can pick up and ways to heal yourself. I just wish some things felt less random.
Cool. Okay. And then finally, Joe, finish that first, please.
So now I'm just going to piggyback off of people. So there is a sense that, these games are difficult. I'm not even going to lie about that. They're difficult. But also, there's a sense that they're difficult because of design. I agree with, infinite spawning enemies. I can't even remember. It was right at the beginning of Super Empire Strikes Back. You get on the Tauntaun and you feel like, oh, cool, I got the Tauntaun. And then, suddenly, big giant snow boulders are just coming at you. And it's kind of like you kind of either duck or you jump over them or whatever else. It's they just throw everything at you. And while this is happening, you have things swooping down at you. It's crazy. I agree with Arron as far as the levels being a little too long. I think that if they had been shortened, that would help at least a little bit. And this is my thing. So, say you don't know what Star Wars is. I mean, I know, crazy, right? But say you don't know what Star Wars is, and these 3 games are your introduction to Star Wars. Which, that should never be your introduction. But anyways. Super Star Wars, I think, does an okay job with mixing the difficulty and the story experience. Very much like the first movie. It tells you the story, it gives you what you need, it has just enough action to keep you attentive, and then leaves you with a feel-good ending at the end. Super Star Wars kind of felt like that to me. Empire, on the other hand, is brutal. It'll beat you down, and it leaves you not honestly wanting to come back at the end. And that's pretty much how Empire is as a movie. It beats you down, leaves you feeling with no hope, no care in the world. It's done. It's over with. And that's pretty much how the game leaves you. And then Return of the Jedi is the oddball, because not only is this game polished to where, yeah, it's difficult, but I feel like I'm making the mistakes, whereas the 2 previous games, I felt like the game was causing me to die, and it wanted me to die. In Super Return of the Jedi, I feel like I was the one making the mistakes that were killing me. So it very much mirrors that movie as well, where you have some lows, but it's also, you got that high at the end. It's you and your skill that got you to the end and to see the ending. And
I forgot one thing, if I can throw in, was
yeah.
I did notice by the time you get to Return of the Jedi, they fixed the weapon system where you can run around freely and shoot, or if you hold the button down, it puts you in a fixed shot position.
Yes.
Which I really liked, because if you played the first game, you noticed that every time you would shoot at enemies, Luke would kind of be a sitting duck.
Yeah.
So I mentioned I appreciated that by the time you got to Jedi.
Yeah. I mean, hands down, if there is one, I mean, and this kind of goes into a little bit of our next topic, but like, let's be fair. Out of the three, if there's one that you're going to play, it should be Return of the Jedi. I think you're going to hear that from pretty much all of us. It'll probably be that game that gets nominated. But anyways, yeah. So that's my feelings as far as those games go. And I am a masochist, so my favorite levels were, like I said before, facing Vader at the end of Empire, and Vader and the Emperor together in Return of the Jedi. The battle with Ed 209. So, those are highlights for all three games.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I don't think So I don't think this last topic will take that long, because we already, some of us kind of touched on this like a little bit already at this point. But yeah. So do the games hold up today, like 2022? I mean, would you play them again? Can you recommend it to other people? I mean, what do you think about the overall, playability, playability like these games at the the modern setting. So, Liam, go ahead, please.
So I will definitely say that if you want a game that looks polished and kind of feels modern, I would say Return of the Jedi would be the way to go, because the problem with the first two games is that there's not that much room for error, whilst the Return of the Jedi, as I've alluded to a couple of times, kind of reminds me a little bit of Super Metroid at times, with the double jump, and just the fact you've got a lot more control over your character. The ability to be able to pick your character out of the three as well, it offers three unique styles of gameplay, to be, in my opinion. But in terms of how they hold up, I would say if you can get your head past the 3D, the Mode 7 style of some of the stages, then I think these games do hold up relatively well, if mainly for the music. I mean, the music is really what makes these games playable in my eyes. I mean, if they didn't nail the music, then most likely these games I would consider to be somewhat memorable, but not that memorable. But the Super Nintendo renditions of the Star Wars music really... I mean, I'm definitely going to play the games again just to hear that music. But out of the three, the most playable would be... if you want a game that kind of eases the difficulty in, the first one's the one to go for. But if you want one that feels modern, then Return of the Jedi would be the way to go. And as for Empire, don't go anywhere near that.
Okay, strong thoughts. Will, what do you have to think?
Yeah, so I think the people that I would recommend these games to would certainly be the older generation, or even a younger generation that understands the way games used to be back then. If you're somebody today that what they're used to is the 3D games and stuff like that, I don't think they're going to enjoy these games as much. Even with what people call like Dark Souls hard style games. It used to be called NES hard. And we used to say that, they went and made these games more difficult, so when you rented them, you didn't complete it during your rental, so you'd have to rent it again. That being said, yeah, it's likely Return of the Jedi is one that I'm going to try to go back to and see if I can finish. Empire, I'd like to try, especially when I noticed later on that you can switch between the saber and the blaster, or at least that's what I saw in a playthrough. I didn't try it. And the original Star Wars, A New Hope, that Super Star Wars, that one, it's a classic story. That's definitely one to try out. So, Yeah, to put them in order, I'd say do Return, A New Hope, and Empire.
Okay. Yeah. So, like I said before, I think these games are still fun to play today, as long as you enjoy platformers and as long as you are a Star Wars fan. Because I think, platformers are different. Platformers are very different games nowadays than they are back then, and there's still a charm and appeal to these 2D platformers. They are very well polished. I mean, they don't do well about the difficulty. The overall game design is pretty good across the board, for all three of them. That said, I definitely agree with all of you, and the Return, I think, is the best polished and the best balanced of the games. Which is why it's my favorite game, the trilogy. Maybe just do that one, and just see. And then if you're a real sucker for a very 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 difficult challenge, maybe pick up the. I maybe try the other two, but yeah, Empire definitely is the most. Empire is definitely the hardest of the three for various reasons. But I think that Return of the Jedi is definitely the easiest in air quotes here of the trilogy to pick up. There are still a lot of fans, and there's still a lot of charm for 2D platformer games, because you do still have modern indie games like a Shovel Knight, which definitely use the 2D side-scrolling perspective platforming features. So yeah, there are still fans. There definitely are fans of franchises out there like this type of gameplay, and I think that Empire still holds it pretty well today as far as that goes. But yeah, so I think given those. If you're somebody in that small subset who both enjoys Star Wars and also enjoys top platformer games, then I think these games still play very well today, for sure. So Arron, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's kind of clear across the board. Most of us, if not all of us, will say Jedi, just because of the added layer of polish. That's the top game. I think in terms of people coming back to these games. I see that you can play them on at least, I think, PS4. So there's some modern platforms that you can go back and play these on, besides the original Super Nintendo. I think that you do have to put some nostalgia goggles on when you play these and view them as a product of their time. Once the nostalgia wore off while I was playing them, what I realized was that there are other games that I would probably rather play that represent their genres better, like a Super Turrican or Super Turrican 2 or a Mega Man X or a Contra. And then as far as the other aspect of the game, I would probably go for Star Fox more often, or like Soulstar on Sega CD or Sylpheed. But for the overall package, Return of the Jedi, I think, nails it the most. I'm still not in love with the levels that are kind of too big, and the randomness of the enemy placement, and those stupid flying enemies that fly you back and drop you. Kill them with fire, please. But I appreciated enough of Return of the Jedi and the polish and the fact that each character is unique enough in that one. I did omit that Han Solo does get bombs he can throw. Each one of these characters has something unique they bring to the package. So if you get frustrated playing as one character, you can usually go back and play that same level and see if approaching it a different way with a different character changes your outcome. So there is that definite replayability that you don't find in most movie licensed games. My final thought is, most people, when these were released, I'll be honest, maybe they played the first one, but didn't play Jedi. It was the same thing I had, where by the time, Donkey Kong Country 3 came out, I was kind of moving on, right? So I don't know that most people would know that, oh, hey, Jedi is the most polished and best to play, because maybe they're thinking in their head, well, it was my least favorite movie, so I'll skip that one. So that's my thought.
Okay.
That's maybe why, if I sound a little bit harsher on these games, it is because I'm coming from the perspective of someone who obviously has not had much interaction with the franchise and definitely did not play these games growing up. So I'm kind of seeing them from 2022, kind of fresh-eyed, no like nostalgia, very much just judging them on face value.
That's fair.
Right.
We need to get you seeing these films, Liam. I'm just saying.
Yes.
I've been mentioning that in the chat.
Definitely.
That
yeah. Joe, so bring us home then.
Well, like a comforting voice that I am every week that we record the podcast, I'm going to let you know. And you know, if you've been here, if you've listened to the podcast, you know that I am a platform guy. So these games should be right up my alley. I should be ecstatic, and I should be singing their praises. But much like these guys, I have the same complaints for these games. Return of the Jedi is the way to go, as I've already stated. And it's kind of disappointing. Like, Super Star Wars is fun for what it is, and you can take either or, Super Star Wars or Return of the Jedi, whichever one you want to start with, but Return of the Jedi is going to be the one that you return to. Which is unfortunate because Empire is my favorite movie. Empire's always been my favorite movie, and to play through that game and be so frustrated by the end, it made me like almost hate the game, but not to a point where I'm going to disregard the movie as it is. But yeah, I just Return of the Jedi. Just go there, go do it, enjoy it,
And enjoy your block button.
right? yes.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, you guys know me. I'm a platform guy. I always suggest platformers when we do this podcast and everything else. Like, it's platformers and beat 'em ups. Like, those are my thing. Oh, and fighting games, which Greg isn't a huge fan of. So it's this should be up my alley. So when I'm telling you, like, Return of the Jedi is the one that you want to play, I'm telling you, Return of the Jedi is the one you want to play.
But okay, and then final thought to wrap things up. I did not know this until I was doing research on this, and I need to check to see if it's still available. I was unaware that the original game, Super Star Wars, Co-Mystics did a port of that game to the PS4 and the Vita back 2015. That also includes enhanced save states, leaderboard abilities, and they have the interface other stuff. Has anybody else
but that's
played
all
that?
they did. They didn't change the dynamics of the game. They didn't change
just emulation.
gameplay.
Right.
It's still hard.
Yeah.
It's still a pain in the butt. Yes, having save states helps, but it's still the same game that we played here today.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, one of that version's one of that version's still available. I'll have to look.
It is. It's also included with PlayStation Now.
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, yeah. I knew these games were available on Virtual Console, but I was unaware of the fact that they had touched up the first game a little bit. I wonder why only the first game, like not the other ones. But that's kind of interesting. But yeah. But yeah, it is what it is. These games are expensive to get on eBay because of course, hey, it's Star Wars, so of course the price is going to be higher. But there are other ways to get these games and play them play them if you want to. So yeah, there is that. But anyway, want to thank everybody here for taking time to join us today for talking about this episode. For a special episode, talk about these games. I very much appreciate you, everybody being here. I know this was a long episode, because there was 5 of us. So thank you again also for the time. Thank you again also the time commitment was fun. Definitely was great to have you guys on here to hash out these games again and give them a more modern hashed out treatment that they probably deserve.
And I second that. Thank you for everyone who showed up today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. So, does anybody else want to have any final thoughts or anything before we finish up here?
Empire.
Parts of that game are fun but it's just it's kind of a mess where the difficulty there's no curve to it. It's just all blindingly hard.
Yeah, and I just looked up. So, Super Star Wars on the PlayStation 4 has trophy support.
Yep.
Okay.
And
yeah.
one of the trophies is beat the game on Jedi difficulty without losing any lives.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
Is there a percentage listed there? Because I really want to know what the percentage of people who've gotten that trophy.
It's
Xbox
2.61%.
Really?
According
okay.
according
Okay.
to PSNprofiles.com.
Huh.
Yeah, 2.61%.
I didn't know you could do that. I thought Steam was the only one that showed you percentages. Oh, okay.
And then you hover
That's
over.
interesting.
Then you hover over it, and there's a 0.7%. I don't know what the percentages, what percentage differences are.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. But yeah. So I forgot to say earlier. If you do, we mentioned before the games do feature stereo sound. If you listen to the game with like headphones, they sound even better because I thought the game sounded good with speakers back in the day, but playing them again now in emulation with headphones, they sound amazing because the stereo sound is something that not every game did back in those days. So I really appreciate them taking the extra step of the audio there. So, but yeah. So, all right. Thank you again. Like I said, for everybody joining us here today. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, suggestions, whatever, you can send them to. So you can send me an email if you want to at the SNES Podcast at yahoo.com. You can also find us on the Facebook page. Joe, how can they reach you?
You can reach me on my very public Facebook page and on Twitter at JOESUX30.
Awesome. And it's Joe's turn to pick the next two games that are coming on this podcast. So what are we doing next?
We're doing Cyborg 009, a Japanese game for the Super Famicom based on an anime of the same name. And it's a platformer.
Never heard of it? No, I'm not a platformer, huh? That's okay. I never heard of the game. This should be interesting to check out. So, but yeah, Joe was saying earlier, I got this game from a list of like recommended Super Famicom games to play. So, somebody loves it. So, we'll get into it next time. So, again, thank you everybody for listening to us. We appreciate it very much. Thank you again to Arron, Will, and Liam for taking time today to join
no
us.
problem.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll have you guys back at some point. I'm sure for additional episodes. So. So thanks again. Take care, everybody, and may the force be with you.
Bye.
See ya.
Thanks.
All right.
Later.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Now you're playing with power. Super power.